thank you all for joining us this evening to learn how you can electrify your ride. My name is Annika Osborne. I'm with Cool the Earth. We're an environmental nonprofit with a mission to reduce carbon emissions and air pollution. While we are big fans of walking, biking, carpooling, preferably with an EV and public transportation, with our Ride and Drive Clean collaboration, we focus on educating and engaging Bay Area residents around zero emissions vehicles like e-bikes, electric cars, and electric trucks. I will say we're very excited tonight. This is our first webinar that we've done. We do webinars all the time, but this is the first one we're doing specifically on electric trucks. So this is really exciting. I'd like to thank the County of Marin for funding this program tonight and West Marin Climate Action for our partnership. And I'd also briefly like to introduce my co-presenters. If you can wave if you want, David Rumpel, Andrew Bach, and Chris Bowe. Here's our agenda for the night. So we'll be covering benefits of going electric, incentives, charging, bidirectional charging, which is quite a great feature for trucks. Then we'll do kind of a showcase of trucks, the current and coming ones. We have an EV owner spotlight this evening. We'll talk a little bit more about our organization, Ride and Drive Clean, and at the end we'll have a Q&A. So there are many benefits to driving electric. In California, our passenger vehicles are the single largest source of GHG emissions, representing up to 50% of our individual carbon footprint. So when we switch from a gas car to an EV and plug into clean energy like we can here in the Bay Area, we're taking impactful climate action by reducing carbon emissions and air pollution, both which disproportionately impact equity priority communities. And in addition to reducing our impact on the planet, there's no sacrifice when we go electric. We can save time, money, and improve our driving experience with an EV. And an EV can even help with backup power when there's a power outage. So although early EV drivers paid a high premium for electric cars, today's EV drivers often save money. And here are some reasons why. It costs much less to fuel an electric car. Fueling a gas truck can be 2 to 5 times more expensive than fueling an EV, depending upon where and when you charge it. And electricity prices tend to be more stable than gas prices, as we've seen in the past few years. In addition, maintenance costs are 40% lower for EVs. It's basically adding windshield wiper fluid and rotating the tires. I do that every 6,000 miles on my EVs. I did replace all 4 tires on my Tesla Model 3 after I had had it for about 4 years and driven 52,000 miles. Then there are the standard incentives available for up to $9,500, which can bring down the cost of purchasing or leasing an electric truck. So let's focus a little bit on these incentives now. So before we get started, I do want to state that I am not a tax expert, and I suggest that you contact a tax professional to make sure you qualify for all of these incentives. So there are currently 3 types of incentives that can save you up to $9,500 when you buy a truck and charge at home. Additional grants and rebates are available for both new and used trucks. There aren't a lot of used trucks on the market yet for people who qualify. We won't be going into great detail on these today, but we know all about the income qualifying grants and rebates, so you can ask us questions during the Q&A. So the California State Rebate is available for many EV buyers and has some vehicle price limits and income qualifications. You do have to claim this rebate within 3 months of taking delivery of your EV. The federal tax credit was revamped last year, and it's now called the Clean Vehicle Credit. If you'd like to, it's available for $7,500 against your tax liability. So while the California State Rebate is a check in the mail, the federal tax credit goes against your tax liability when you file your taxes. There are some vehicle price limits for the truck. It's below $80,000. And currently the Ford F-150 and the Chevy Silverado qualify for the full tax credit, $7,500, and the Rivian qualifies for $3,750. There's also the home EV charger federal tax credit. 30% of the cost up to $1,000. Let's see what else. And depending upon where you live, there may be additional utility and CCA incentives. I know PG&E just came out with the pre-owned rebate. Again, there aren't many electric trucks on the used market yet. And then you can also get paid for retiring your older gas car. So there are a lot of requirements for the federal tax credit. And, not all of the EVs qualify and e-trucks or electric trucks. But there is a little bit of a workaround if you lease your truck or your electric vehicle if it doesn't currently qualify. The dealership may pass on the $7,500 credit when they figure out the lease payments, since it would then be considered a commercial purchase for the dealer. Actually, it's the bank that will take that commercial tax credit, and they might pass it along to you, the full $7,500, if you lease it. You do want to verify with the dealer before you sign that lease, but it's good to be aware that that's out there. That's a possibility. They're not really referring to it, from what I understand, as the federal tax credit lease rebate. They're calling it a lease credit or a lease bonus or something like that. But almost every manufacturer now has a lease credit for $7,500. How convenient. Starting in 2024, the consumer can ask the dealer to take the tax credit, and they will pass it on to the buyer or lessor at the point of sale as a rebate, which will be super helpful for the down payment. These savings calculators listed will help you find out exactly which incentives you qualify for. So there have been, what we're seeing is, some vehicle price caps and some income caps. And all in all, and not all EVs are included in all of these. Overall, as an organization, we're very excited about the state of incentives because we believe we're moving in the right direction in terms of providing incentives for those who really need it, bringing more green jobs to the U.S., and relying less on unpredictable sources for battery components and assembly. So there are several incentives for commercial trucks. So there's the California State Rebate, the CVRP. It's $2,000, but only for one vehicle. And the base price has to be below $60,000. There's the PG&E EV Fleet Program for up to $4,000 per EV or truck, and that has to be for 2 or more EVs to count as a fleet.
That would be nice.
There is the Federal Clean Vehicle Tax Credit, up to $7,500 for the light duty, as I mentioned on the prior slide, and for medium and heavy duty, up to $40,000, or 30% of the cost of the EV, up to $40,000. And for the federal tax credit, it's unlimited in terms of how many trucks you can, your business can claim this credit for. But it is a tax credit. And then we have just some definitions for that define medium duty and heavy duty trucks. So in addition to incentives for the actual vehicles, there are also some incentives for the chargers. So there's the federal tax incentive up to 30% of equipment and installation costs. PG&E also has this EV Fleet Program, 50% of the cost for 2 or more charging ports, and actually up to $42,000 in disadvantaged communities. That's really significant because, it's easy when we live in a single family home to charge up our EVs. But if you live in an apartment or a condo, it's not as easy. So it's great that they are trying to help people in disadvantaged communities really be able to drive electric as well. And then if you live in the MCE service area, that's Marin, Contra Costa, Napa, and Solano counties, there is also the MCE EV charging rebate. So $3,000 per port for level 2 chargers, and that's between 2 and 20 charging ports. And you'll get an additional $500 per port if you opt up for Deep Green. That means that you're supporting their program for 100% renewables. Otherwise, their Light Green program, we're supporting 60% of the fuel to be renewables, like solar and wind. They also have a program for level 1 chargers, $750 per port, much less expensive to install those. And that has to be between 4 and 40 charging ports and an additional 125 for deep green. Okay, so I'm done talking about the incentives portion. I don't know are there any questions that anybody has about incentives before I move on?
Who can qualify for these commercial things? Can you be quasi-commercial and you need at least 2 of them to qualify for the?
Hang on. Yes, so you do need 2 of them to qualify for the PG&E EV fleet program. I will say what PG&E and MCE, if you happen to be in the MCE territory, they want you to contact them to go over all of the details with them. I will drop a link at the end of this program in the chat that links directly to the commercial incentives so that you can read a little bit more about them.
Thank you.
Sure. But yeah, especially for the charger incentives, they definitely want to work with you and help you with the installation of these of the chargers. So, okay, so in addition to saving money with an EV or e-truck, you might also save some time. With an EV, you have access to the HOV lane for 3 years. You have to get a decal from the DMV. You'll never have to wait in line at a gas station again. How lovely. For many people, it's convenient to charge at home, overnight, or at work when the sun is shining and we have plentiful solar energy available. EVs offer low maintenance and efficiency. So there are very few maintenance visits. While there are 2,000 plus moving parts in a gas car, there are fewer than 20 in an EV. So very efficient vehicles. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about charging before we move on to more stuff, the trucks and other things. So people do get worried about charging, but for most people, 80 to 90% of charging is done at home or at work. Charging at home is easy. Just plug in the charger that comes with your vehicle into a standard 120 volt outlet. There are no install costs besides perhaps an extension cord, a grounded heavy duty extension cord, and it gives you about 40 miles of charge in 8 hours. In the Bay Area, and on average, people drive 25 miles a day. So this simple solution called Level 1 works great for most people. But if you drive more than 40 miles a day, a good option is to see if you can charge at work. And if not, you may want to purchase a home charging station for Level 2 charging. And you'll need a 240 volt outlet for a Level 2 charger. You'll get about 25 miles in an hour, so you can easily get a full charge overnight. But I do want to point out that charging an EV is different from fueling up a gas car. With a gas car, I used to wait until I was down to like 1/8 of my tank. I'd go to the gas station and fill it up all the way. With an EV, I'm basically just topping off what I've driven, on a day-to-day basis. So when I come home at the end of the day, I plug in and I set my timer to start charging. Well, I work from home and I have solar, so I charge my car starting at 10 a.m. But before I had solar, I would just set it to start charging at midnight when I have good, affordable, clean energy available. So really, I'm just typically going from like 60% to 80% of my charge on a day-to-day basis. So it's very rare that I have to go from like 10% to 80%. 80% is what most manufacturers recommend that you charge to on a daily basis. If you're taking it out on a road trip, they recommend charging it up to 100% the day before, so you can use the entire range of the battery. Okay, so charging away from home is easy too. There are many Level 2 public chargers available at lots of shopping centers and malls and civic centers and all around. But when you're on a road trip, you want to use Level 3 charging, which is the fastest charging available. For most cars, you can go from 10 to 80% in 30 minutes or less. Some of these new EVs that are coming out really fast, like 15 to 18 minutes to get a really solid 80% charge there. There are a few different standards for the charging port. You'll see the one on the right is Tesla. The Cybertruck hasn't come out yet, but that's the one that they'll be using. And then the one in the center is the CCS system that all other vehicles will use. The one on the left is really just for Nissan Leafs at this point. So once you start driving electric, it's ideal to charge your EV from rooftop solar. There's a federal tax credit available this year and for the next 10 years for 30% of the cost of rooftop solar and storage, meaning the battery. It's a great feeling to charge your car from the electricity that you generate from your own roof. And for more resilience, you may want to consider a battery for storage. But if you're not ready for solar, you can choose a clean energy plan from your utility or CCA so that you're charging your EV with clean energy from the sun and the wind. Here in Marin County, we have MCE. As I mentioned earlier, there are two options. You can be on the 60% renewables option or the 100% renewables option. Both of those are cheaper than getting electricity from PG&E. So which has about 30% renewables. So when we're lucky here in the Bay Area that we have these CCAs, alternative electricity providers, as well as some small utilities that offer really clean, affordable electricity. There are also time of use rate plans that you can be on, an EV time of use rate plan, or other time of use plans, whatever works best for your lifestyle. Okay, I'm going to pass it on to David Rempel, who is a member of the West Marin Climate Action Group. David, I'll let you introduce yourself and take it from here.
Thank you, Annika, and thank you all for joining this meeting. We've been working in West Marin for about 3 years to try to expand the number of people out here who have EVs and make sure there's enough EV chargers. There's too few out here, and we're working on increasing the numbers. I want to talk about bidirectional charging. It's a little complicated, but I want to talk specifically about how it applies to trucks. There are really three levels or types of bidirectional charging: vehicle to load, vehicle to home, and vehicle to grid. And I'll talk about each one because there are important differences between them. Next slide. These trucks have announced that they have bidirectional charging capabilities, but the real capabilities of having them working in a house in terms of vehicle to home are not quite there yet. I think sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, they'll be up and running, and we'll talk about some of the details of doing the vehicle to house bidirectional charging. Next slide. So vehicle to load is the simplest form, and it basically involves plugging in stuff, drills, cross saws like that, or medical devices into outlets that are in the truck. Next slide. And this shows a picture of a frunk on the front of a truck and someone's tools in the front plugged into an outlet. Next slide. And here's a critical one, really. This is a Ford F-150 set of outlets. And to do vehicle to load, you need 2 inverters in the vehicle instead of 1. All vehicles come with 1 inverter. They take the AC that comes from your house, convert it to DC, and use that to charge the batteries. To have a vehicle to load or have outlets on the truck like this, you need a second inverter that converts the DC of the battery to AC. And then you can plug in appliances. You can plug in refrigerators, lights, and other things. There's a few vehicles that have 240 volt outlets. The Ford 150 is one of them. And the Ford 150 has actually 3 inverters. The charging inverter and 2 other inverters, so they can produce a fair amount of energy through the outlets. In fact, if you look down here on the power limits, the F-150 Lightning can deliver 9.6 kilowatts of power through the outlets, which is a lot. The Rivian can deliver 2.2 kilowatts. And just to give it a comparison, a fridge consumes 0.4 kilowatts of energy. A big fridge does. So it gives you an idea that you can really drive pretty big construction equipment with the outlet on a Ford F-150 through the 220 outlet or the 110 outlet. This is the vehicle to load concept. Next slide. The vehicle to home concept is more complicated. And here the idea is basically that you can plug in your truck or other vehicle into a special charger, and it'll both charge the truck, and if you lose power at your house, it'll power up your house. Next slide. So you've got the top part here, unidirectional, the grid to the house, to the AC charger, to the electric car. The bidirectional goes both ways. Energy goes to the electric car, and then if you lose power in the house or the grid, the electric car can then transfer energy to the house or to the grid also, and we'll talk about that. That part's really more complicated. Next slide. So the vehicle to home concept is really a pretty cool one. This is a clean energy source for your house, and it can power your house, like I mentioned, during a power outage. And typically the bidirectional charger has an inverter. That is, it takes DC from your car and converts it to AC. And it also has what's called an automatic transfer switch. So if you lose power from the grid, this automatic transfer switch clicks over, and your whole house is then powered by your car or your truck instead of the grid. And you need an automatic transfer switch like this if you have an automated system. So these bidirectional chargers are more expensive than a typical charger. They might cost $4,000, $5,000, or $6,000 for the charger itself. And the installation is complex. The electrical contractor has to tap into your power, your electrical panel, and that installation can be anywhere from $2,000 to $8,000, depending on the location of the bidirectional charger. There are some models of these available and running just for demonstration. I know of no one who's actually has one in Marin County, maybe in California, that's working in a real way yet. And if any of you do, we can talk about that at the end. They will be coming, I think, at the end of this year and functional. But one of the other problems is that these special boxes, they need to be UL rated. So they have to be evaluated federally, and they're not yet. That's a process that they're going through now. And also, the county or city that you live in has to allow them in the permitting process. And I don't know of any counties or cities that have permitted bidirectional charges yet. So that's why this is off still in a few years. Next slide. These are some of the companies that have announced that they're developing bidirectional chargers or do have bidirectional chargers out. And there'll be more on the market, I'm sure, in the next year or two. This is really, it's a really important technology. There is a bill now in the state that requires all vehicles to be bidirectional ready for home and grid in, I think, about 5 years. So this is a concept that's coming, but it's not ready for prime time right now. We're going to hear from Chris a little later about how he does vehicle to home through a workaround process. Next slide. So I want to talk now about vehicle to grid. And to give you a perspective on vehicle to grid, I need to really talk about solar panels and how they work with home batteries, because this is the same concept that works in vehicle to grid. Solar panels, as you all know, reduce greenhouse gases. They provide home electricity during power outages, reduce your electricity cost, and they also allow for cost shifting to further lower your energy costs if you have time of use billing. So you can charge a battery and then run off the battery when the electricity is expensive from 4 p.m. to midnight. My energy costs now are 16 cents per kilowatt hour during the day, and after 3 p.m., the costs go up to almost 50 cents a kilowatt hour. So I don't want to use electricity from the grid from 3 p.m. to midnight, and so I use the battery for that. Next slide. So I don't know if you remember, but last summer we had some heat waves in California that almost led to blackouts between August 17th and September 9th. There were 10 days of near rolling blackouts in the state. And if you look at this graph here, on the bottom are the hours, and one of those days, the 6th of September, from midnight until midnight. And you can see it's kind of a sine wave curve. There's a huge demand of energy in the state when the air conditionings turn on around 3 p.m. in the afternoon till around 7 or 8 at night. And that's when that green line shows it peaking right around 4 in the afternoon. And here you can see that the energy demands for the state, the energy demand is the purple line. The energy demand for the state went almost up to 50 gigawatts of energy, which is a huge amount of energy. The green part here is the energy provided by solar systems in the state, alternative energy. And solar then produced a lot of that energy from 6 a.m. until around 5 p.m. But then when the sun went down, solar is reduced. And right at that point, when the sun went down, was a critical time when we were near rolling blackouts. And so there, I think it's in the next slide, if you move on to that one, there was a call for houses with Tesla batteries to participate in a Tesla virtual power plant. This is an experiment that went on for those days, and 4,600 houses in California participated in this process, where PG&E, Southern SDGE, and Southern California Edison basically took control of your house battery and sucked the energy out of your battery from around 4 p.m. till 8 p.m., depending on their needs. This provided up to 33 megawatts of power to the state, which helped prevent the rolling blackout. This was set up and it was voluntary participation, and you could set a limit for how far you wanted PG&E to take the energy out of your battery. I participated in this and set my limit at 50%. I didn't want them to take more energy than that out of the battery. But this has big potential. There's more than 1 million homes that have solar, more than 50,000 homes that have power walls, and the California Public Utilities Commission has even new incentives for adding more house batteries to increase the number of houses that could do this. So this is an example of a home battery to grid, which is very similar to vehicle to grid. Next slide. The vehicle to grid concept is similar. You assist during the peak demands to prevent rolling blackouts. Your vehicle is plugged in to your bidirectional charger. And during that time, you can reduce curtailment, which is lost solar energy, and we can talk about that later if you want. And there's 1.5 million EVs in California. And when you think about the size of an EV battery, 40 to 120 kilowatt hours, compared to a Powerwall, 13.5 kilowatts, there's much more energy from vehicles than there is in these Powerwalls. So if you really wanted to help prevent a rolling blackout or smooth the demand curve, this is a way to do it. These vehicles could deliver more than 10 gigawatts of charging to the whole state if it was set up. Again, this is voluntary with discharge limits, and if you do this, you can make money. When I did it, I made $2 per kilowatt hour. So I think I made $200 during that 2-week period. Next slide. And I think that's it for bidirectional charging. And I want to turn it over now to the exciting part of the talk given to you by Andrew. Andrew, it's all yours.
Calling it exciting may be an oversell, but I will take that and I will try and run with it. I hope everyone is enjoying this so far. Quick background. My name's Andrew Bach. I am a longtime automotive enthusiast. I have been driving electric vehicles now for about 10 years. And more importantly, I work for a company called TuneIn Radio, which is actually the new sort of radio platform that is embedded and integrated into most of these new electric vehicles that are coming to market. So I have the good fortune of having worked very closely with a lot of the automotive organizations. Are you guys still hearing me? Yes? Okay,
Yes.
great. I couldn't tell. Great. So I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of the automotive brands over the last several years as they've worked to integrate TuneIn into their head-end units and got a pretty good view of where the market is going. So I'm happy to share what I've learned so far and answer any questions that may come up about the vehicles themselves. So a lot's going on in the truck world. And in fact, we'll get to the photo that I have of the Cybertruck, but that is actually from today. That is a spy shot that someone took of the Cybertruck out on the road today in Fremont, California. So that thing is getting ready for delivery after God knows how many years and delays. So it's pretty interesting to see that thing's actually coming to fruition. So we've got a lot of trucks that are about to hit the road, not just Chris's Ford F-150 that we're seeing more and more of. Next slide. So the Rivian, for those who have not seen one yet, the Rivian R1T was the sort of first to market of the trucks. They have that advantage. So a lot of people really saw these guys as sort of the leader in the truck market, even though obviously we knew that the Ford F-150 and some of these others were coming up on its tails. Rivian came out and really tried to position themselves out of the gate as this outdoorsy, really, life on the road sort of focused forward type of brand. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that you see here in this photo, they actually had to abandon because they couldn't figure out a way to manufacture them fast enough. So if you look at that camping stove thing that comes out of the middle, they're no longer offering that. I actually don't know if they're even still offering the tent option, but it just goes to show you the ways that people were, thinking about utilizing trucks and how they could be almost replacing campers and other larger vehicles with some of the abilities of these electric vehicles. Next slide. So I'm going to go through as quickly as I can, sort of a slide by slide showing you what the market looks like today for trucks. And each one of these has the same sort of specs on the next to the photo of them. And then I have a comparison chart right at the end. But the Rivian is the one that I was just talking about the most. What has been one of the biggest selling points for the Rivian is actually how quick it is, how fast it is off the line. So as you can see, it's got just over 3 seconds, 0 to 60 time for a truck is just insanely fast. So that is it can be a very jarring experience for people who have not ridden in one yet. But most importantly, they were really combining this high capacity battery with the speed and acceleration of a sports car, towing and payload capacity of a truck, and giving you all of this in a vehicle and a product that is going to get, in many cases, upwards of 400 miles. Now, David, you were talking a little bit about, I think, an article that recently came out that was showing someone's attempt to take a long road trip in their Rivian, I think, from through California, and the challenges that they have with that. That was less about the car, more about the charging infrastructure, but the vehicles themselves. Go ahead, Doug. Do you have something to add? No, but the vehicles themselves, I've seen them up and down the roads, California, making all kinds of long road trips. They're really solid, fun trucks for people who have not had the pleasure of seeing or riding in them yet. And the R1S just recently started hitting the road. That is the SUV version of this car, but we're only focusing on trucks for this presentation. And so the Rivian was first, and now let's talk about what came in 2022, and then what's coming out here in 23 and 24 model year cars. So the Ford F-150, which Chris is going to give us a little bit of a deeper dive into his personal experiences with, hit the road in 2022. If you could get your hands on one. Still very difficult to get your hands on them, but have gotten really positive reviews. One truck of the year And overall, I think is probably the best example right now of what's available in terms of that combination of giving you capacity and capability, along with sort of the advancements and new opportunities that the EVs bring. Most importantly, that frunk and the additional charging that it brings. The one thing that I did want to mention about the Ford F-150 is actually the sort of the charging rate of this versus some of the other cars. You'll see they're looking at this more about how do you get to 80%, where a lot of the other manufacturers are looking at things in terms of just looking at it at a different scale. So I wanted to point that out to you. So we've got a couple of new entrants. The Chevy Silverado, I think, is probably one of the most exciting for people coming out. This is, for all intents and purposes, a baby version of the GMC Hummer. So for those of you that have seen the Hummer, which I'll touch on here in a few slides, the Silverado is, should we say, a more practical and realistic offering for most people. That said, the first version of this that's coming out, they're selling, is the RST First Edition, which is $100,000+ version of the car. But obviously, they're going to get to the point where the goal is to be putting more of the mass-produced 40,000 and 50,000 model range vehicles out there. I happen to think that the Silverado is the best looking of all these. And I think that what Chevy's doing and with their overall EV strategy is pretty compelling. So I'm excited about seeing these Silverados out on the road. This was just announced a couple of weeks ago, so we have very little information on this. But while I was in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show, the Ram 1500 Rev was introduced to the market. Gorgeous looking truck. One of the biggest advantages of this one versus others is the range. So they are estimating that this one is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 500 miles of range. Now, while that's not necessarily important for everybody in terms of range, the other way to think about this is obviously the higher range, bigger battery capacity that you have, the more capability you'll have to do more truck-like things as well. So if you're thinking about towing, if you're thinking about doing things that may require a little bit more power or energy, obviously battery or vehicles that are having the higher battery capacity are going to give you more opportunity to do that. There it is. So this is today. This truck pulling off of the highway somewhere down in the South Bay. I think the only thing that they said was missing from this is the giant windshield wiper that is on the front of this car. That I still don't understand how it's going to function or why they did it, but it's there, and it's making it to production. So. For those of you that want to test their Cybertruck, you're going to have one like 85-inch windshield wiper, which is kind of interesting, but it's what they've decided to move forward with. But this is the vehicle, and they are starting production. My estimates are in the next couple of weeks. So this is something that you are likely to see on the road in some capacity by this summer. Which I'll leave it at that. I don't know what to make of this one in particular. I don't know exactly what the market is for this. If you look at sort of what this truck is doing versus some of the others, towing capacity is lower, hauling capacity is lower. I think it's going to be a little bit more focused towards people who may not be trying to replace trucks, but are more trying to do something fun. But we'll see. The GMC Hummer I mentioned before. So this is out right now and available. This is probably one of the most high demand trucks on the secondary market. They are holding their value and almost impossible to get your hands on them. A lot of really interesting, unique features with the Hummer, a lot of power. But with all of that comes a lot of weight. And so actually one of the negatives of the Hummer is that if you do some research, you'll find that it's actually less efficient than most gas vehicles right now in terms of the weight to battery ratio and how much power it uses. So this is not one that I would recommend most people be looking at if you do want something in this vein. I recommend either looking at the Chevy Silverado, which we talked about, or the one coming up on the next slide, which was also just announced, which is the GMC Sierra EV. And the Sierra and the Silverado are sort of brother-sister vehicles to each other. This one should be coming out soon. I haven't seen the model yet. The pricing estimates are still from late last year, from October. The only difference between this one and the Chevy GMC tends to be a little bit more of an upscale brand. Towing capacity is going to be a little bit lower on this, but a lot of the specs otherwise are the same. What else is out there? There's a couple of interesting brands that are trying hard to break into this market. One of them is current right now. Their name is Lordstown, and they have a vehicle called the Endurance. Those are actually my photos that I took of one Endurance that I've seen out on the road. There aren't many of them, but they are trying to break into the fleet truck vehicle space. And so it's going to be interesting to see if they are able to make it. They're one of the only independent manufacturers that are still out there in the truck space. And then another one that I thought was really interesting to share here is with the Scout brand. Scout is an older brand for some folks. Anyone who is a car aficionado, they may have heard of the Scout brand or remembered it from the 60s. So Volkswagen is trying to bring that back. And the goal is here, you can see this is their sort of preliminary design, but the goal is to make it very rugged truck and SUV focused brand to compete directly with Ford Broncos and Jeep Wranglers and things like that. So you're going to see some of these, some news about these in the next couple of years. And then I just made this chart. I'm not going to go through it for everybody, but when Annika shares this deck, you'll at least have it so you can have sort of a quick reference to show you how they all stack up next to each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much for making this super useful chart, Andrew, and all these really great slides. Does anybody have any questions right now about these trucks before we move on? Okay, well, that was great. At this point, I would like to introduce Chris Bowe, who is, we just met him about a week ago, or learned that he's around here in the Bay Area, doing a lot of very interesting and exciting things with his Ford F-150. So, Chris, do you want to unmute and let us know a little bit about your Ford F-150 Lightning and your experience with it?
Yeah, so my name's Chris. I live out in the East Bay in Hayward. Primarily, most of my driving is just day-to-day commuting and traveling around the Bay Area. I've had the Lightning since last July. I was the one that I took first delivery at my local dealer in Fremont. It's just been a joy to drive. I mean, it rides like an old 78 Cadillac. They rated it 4.4 seconds, but I may or may not have timed it closer to 4. It definitely has a lot of power in it. Not that I'm racing a truck all over the place. It's just one of those fun things to do on occasion. But it's really just the practicality of it that I fell in love with. I was a truck guy before and had a Ranger and then an F-150. And then when I had kids, switched over to a minivan for practicality. But now that they're a bit older and I've done my 8 years of minivan penance, I was ready to go back to a truck. And this was just good timing that the Lightning came out when it did. So got a high trade in for the minivan, went with the Lightning, got lucky to get the first one off the dealer lot. And I've done all kinds of great stuff with it. You know, it's been great for Halloween. We did a Frunker treat. We're able to power up different decorations, strobe lights, the jack-o'-lantern, the different things, which just make it fun, different sounds. You can do tailgating, where you can plug a television into it. You can, there's a little spot in the front area where you can do an ice chest and it'll drain. There's a drain hole through it. The Rivian has something very similar. In fact, of course, Costco runs all the practical day-to-day stuff. Throw your pizza in there. I mean, it's just great space. The kids fit in there. Not that you'd want to carry them in there, but it's fun just to put them in there for fun. And then it's powerful enough off the power in the bed that it can power an EV charger. Here you can see a picture where I was doing an EV event and somebody was not fully charged. And so just gave them a little boost, enough to get them to a supercharge station. And so that's just one of the fun things that it can do. You can plug a level 2 charger into the back of it and charge another EV with it. And the battery pack is large enough that I could easily get somebody, 50 miles of range and barely touch my own. So the other things I've done with it is you can power a bouncy house if you're down at a park. You could I've seen weddings powered with it, audio systems and lighting. And then for myself, I've powered my entire house with it. So that is, I think, one of the big selling points for me. We talked about the Powerwall before. I also do have a Powerwall, but that Powerwall is $12,000+ for 13 kilowatts. This is the equivalent of 7 Powerwalls. And so if you do the math on 7 times 12,000, I essentially got a free truck and a very large Powerwall. So the Powerwall is great for short-term outages, but if something long-term were to happen, I like to have the Lightning as an emergency backup. I can run my house for 5 days off the Lightning. And then we talked a little bit about the virtual power plant earlier. I also participate in that. Because I have the Lightning, I'm comfortable bringing the Powerwall down to 20%. So I give up all the way down to 20% of my Powerwall. And then if something were to still happen, there still was a backup or a blackout, I'd have the Lightning to plug back in. I wouldn't have to worry about running out of the Powerwall. So there's just a lot of practical fun with it. Tools, you can plug a welder into it, a circular saw, all that kind of stuff. This is a couple different examples of the kind of vehicle to home solutions. The one you see on the left is called Ford Intelligent Backup. And you can see, as we talked about before, it's quite complex. You definitely need an electrician, permitting. And then what you've got here is that charger you see on the left there is called the Ford Charge Station Pro. And unlike a standard charger you might find where it's just the J1772, this one looks like a CCS. It looks just like a DC fast charger. This also is more powerful. A standard charger might be 40 amps, 48 amps. Those are common charger ratings. The Ford Charge Station Pro is all the way up to 80 amps of power. It's the most powerful station that's for home use. There are some older Teslas that'll go up to 80 kilowatts or 80 amps. But they're pretty rare. This Ford Charge Station Pro can do 80 amps of power, which is quite a bit. And then, of course, it's got the CCS, which allows it to take the DC power, bring it back through, and it's got all those things we talked about before. It's got the automatic transfer switch. It's got the inverter, so it inverts the DC power, and just like it would DC from a solar panel, puts it into your house, allows it to go back to the grid. If they develop that the way they have with the Tesla Powerwall, all those things can come into play with it. But it is expensive. It's $8,000 to $13,000 depending on your home and who you get to install it. And so for me, being that I already, a couple obstacles for me, I already had a Powerwall, so it doesn't integrate well with that. I also have micro inverters, not an inverter, not a string inverter setup. So it doesn't integrate well with that either. So I went with a different solution, which is you see in the pictures there, I plug into the back of my 240 volt plug in the back of the Lightning, and I plug it just like I would a generator, a standard propane or gas or diesel generator. And this uses a manual transfer switch. So it's quite a bit different than the automatic transfer switch, where it has some intelligence to it. The way I'm doing it, might cost you $1,000 to $1,500 to wire it up, versus the $8,000 to $13,000. But I've got to manually plug it in. I've got to manually flip over the circuit breakers. So I think the next slide shows an example of the manual transfer switch. If we can kick over to the next slide. Oh, maybe it doesn't. Was there another one or no? I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I just had these 2 slides. I wasn't sure exactly which one to include, but
okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, the manual transfer switch is just basically like if anybody's seen one with a manual generator with a propane, gas, or diesel, it's the exact same thing. Where you basically have a critical loads circuit. It can be anywhere from 6 to 10 circuits usually. And for example, it's not going to power my air conditioner. It's not going to power my oven. but it can power the whole rest of my house, no problem at all. And so there's another way you can do it where you go through the main panel and an interlock switch. So that's another alternative to do. And so both of those are lower cost solutions. They're just not as elegant, and they're not as fun as the automated ones. But if you're working on a budget, or if you've already got something from a previous generator installed, again, it's just from a practicality standpoint, it's just as effective. So that's kind of what I've done there.
That's great. Thank you so much, Chris. I see you've answered a couple questions in the chat. Also, I'm sure there will be more questions. Just going to finish up the presentation here. So a little bit about our organization, Ride and Drive Clean. We're here to help you go electric. We offer weekly Zoom webinars like this one. We have EV 101, 102, EVs for backup power, how to save money with an EV. We have a robust website highlighting available and coming EVs and e-bikes, how to EV section, steps to driving electric, buying and driving guides, and a calendar of events. We also host EV and e-bike shows, so you can check out new and some of the most popular EVs out there and talk to EV owners about driving electric. We have one coming up on Saturday in Alameda. We have another one in San Rafael coming up on May 13th. You could check our events page for information about those. What else? We also offer these EV and e-bike discount campaigns from time to time. We know that the cost of getting into an EV is a barrier for a lot of people. So we partner with a car concierge service called Cartelligent, and they negotiate great discounts on EVs that we are able to pass along to you. So we're all about fewer gas vehicle miles driven. I know this program is all about trucks, and it's hard to get a truck right now, but can we have your support by pledging to make your next car, truck or bike electric? Our biggest ask really is please don't buy a new gas car, because it will be on this earth emitting carbon and air pollution for 12 to 15 years, and we have to stop doing that as soon as possible. Feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions. And you can also throw questions into the chat if you'd like.
Peter?
Which of the trucks and which other cars currently have the capability for bidirectional charging?
As far as I know, only the Ford Lightning has the bidirectional charging. Like, someone may be more knowledgeable than me on that, but there might be.
Yeah, there are a couple of cars that have the bidirectional charging. So the Kia EV6 and the Hyundai Ioniq 5.
Hyundai, yep.
Yeah, the Fisker Ocean that's coming out any minute now, or in a few weeks at least, has bidirectional charging. The Genesis, gosh, I think it's I don't remember which version, but this GV60.
The GV60.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was the 60 or the 70. But the exciting thing is that every manufacturer is talking about it. And Tesla has said that they're going to, Tesla seems to have like all the right hardware for that, but it might be a software update. And there was an announcement saying that by 2024, Tesla will have the ability to do bidirectional charging as well. But yeah, I mentioned this in the chat. One of the things that there was a little bit of concern, we are trying to monitor and read more about what, how does this impact the battery? Does it have a big impact on the battery or not? I've read some differing sources on this. I don't know if anybody here has any more information about that. Doug, I think you mentioned something. Paul, maybe it was. Yeah, Paul.
There was just a study by Tesla, or publication by Tesla, where they now have vehicles that have run more than 200,000 miles, and their loss of battery function is about 12%. So it's much less loss than I thought it would be at 200,000 miles. So I'm not so worried about the charging and discharging degrading the battery as the worry was, I think, in the past.
Sorry, I'm afraid.
Can you hear me? My name is Paul Denig, and I used to work for Panasonic.
So we've worked quite a bit with energy storage and power electronics. If you stay roughly between 15% of the charged capacity and 85% of the charged capacity, those are rough numbers, you don't take off too much of the life if you're within the operating temperature range of the battery. If you drop below that in the state of charge of the battery, or you go above that, if you were, say, charging it up, that's when you start to take life off of the battery. And as you know, a car like a Prius, for example, it's been around longer, it's a hybrid, but its battery pack life is roughly 10 years. And that's about where the warranty cuts off. So yes, you will take life off the battery if you deeply discharge the battery, or if you operate when it's very cold or very hot. So just beware of that. It's not just a freebie. You cannot discharge and charge the battery forever and not have any impact on the vehicle. And as far as I know, battery packs cost about $10,000 to replace. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying that vehicle to grid is bad. I'm just saying, use common sense. When you use up your battery pack, it won't last forever.
Right. Yeah, I kind of give an example when I do my regular EV 101 webinars. So when I got my Tesla Model 3, more than 4 years ago, I had 240 miles of range. And now when I have had like 52,000 miles on it, I have 226 miles of range. I can charge it to 226. And I think, in 10 years, I'll be able to charge it to maybe 210. And so for me, like on a day-to-day basis, that has no difference, because I'm really just going from like 60 to 80% of my battery. The only time it really makes a difference is when I'm on a long road trip. I'll just have to stop a little more frequently to charge. But what's really great about this is that we can think about these cars that, most of the cars that are out right now have 200 to 300 miles of range. So even when they come down to 150 miles of range, that does not mean that the car is dead. That means that is a great commuter car. That is a great car for so many people. So it's kind of interesting. Kind of depends on how you use it. It's, could be a great second car in a family.
I also think over the next 10 years or so, you're going to see a real transformation of battery technology and people that are recycling them and refurbishing them. And there's lots of places that do it with the Prius. And I think it's going to be the same thing with the Teslas as they start to reach that 10-year mark. And there's companies set up that do this. And, battery tech will change. I know with the Lightning, they're really smart with how they did it. The battery pack has like 8 bolts. And it literally drops straight down in a matter of minutes. And you could have a future battery pack in 10 years that uses that same bolt pattern, and you can replace it and get 500 miles out of it with some new technology that costs $5,000, and you completely given yourself a brand new truck. So I think, the free market and entrepreneurship, and, that's as you start to kind of go over that hump of adopting and the market prevails, you're going to have people that's their business, in the secondary market. So I think stuff will be coming by the time the current group of people run out of their warranty period. I think you're going to find some exciting things on the horizon.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention the second use of batteries. There's a lot of research being done to transform these batteries just for energy storage, which is something that our utilities are really interested in, because, if you don't capture the solar energy that we're getting more and more of in California, when the sun goes down, it's gone. So being able to store the electricity, and, I think it's interesting. And then great news. I used to say 95% of the battery minerals, the critical minerals in the batteries are recyclable. I just read an article, 99% are able to be reused. And they're predicting that like a quarter, this is just a number that I read, like a quarter of new EVs are going to be made from these recycled critical minerals, so that we're not going to have to keep mining more and more critical minerals, which is, of course, sort of like the dark side of EVs and lithium ion batteries.
There's already chemistry today that Tesla is going to start doing with their shorter range density out of the new formulation, but it allows it to charge and discharge many more cycles and much more safely. So there's a trade-off. There's some ways that they do it are going to give you much longer range, but you can't charge and discharge them as deeply as we mentioned earlier. Other ones you can do that more, but you're not going to have the density that gives you quite as much range. So they're going to have different options, different models, and then those batteries can hold up better to some of those. And then, like you said, used on the secondary market for eventual home battery backup too. So there's a lot of things that I think are going to happen from this.
It's very exciting. Like, it's really a whole new way of looking at energy and how to use it at the right time. People are so worried about like, oh, our grid is going to fail all the time, but really, it really comes down to grid-friendly charging practices, and it's something we're all going to have to learn. I see a question in the chat here. It's, here we are in Northern California. What temperature is very cold and very hot? I mean, I've read some stuff about this. Does anybody have any great answers here?
When it gets below 30, that the batteries tend to need a little bit of extra heat to get them going again. And your charge speed will be impacted at temperatures when you get into the 30s and below. And the Tesla is really good about, if it knows you're going to a charger, it will prep the battery and warm it up to get it to the better temperature, which is really amazing. Ford has a great way to do it if you're at home, where you can tell it at desk, you have a time that you say, hey, I go in the morning and I'm going to leave at 8 a.m. It will precondition the battery and the cabin temperature for you while you're plugged in. So but it's not as good about being, hey, I'm on the way to a charge station. It's not as good about that. So there's things it does for that. And then heat wise, the heat isn't really too much of an issue. It'll keep the battery air cooled and using the coolant that goes through the batteries. If you're just driving, I mean, you could be in 100-degree Arizona heat and it'll drive okay. The heat of the temperature is more about the high voltage DC fast charging. That's more where the more you DC fast charge something at the higher voltages, it's that heat that really starts to degrade the battery faster. So if most of your charging is done at home with a few occasional road trips that are DC fast charging, that's not going to have a big impact on your battery. But if all of your battery charging is you running it down to 10%, fast charging it all the way up to 100, and that's all you're doing on a regular basis for 100,000 miles, you're going to have a lot more degradation of your battery than you would have if most of your charging was done at home. So when they talk about heat, they're more talking about the heat of that DC fast charging and the charge curve that tries to protect itself. The charge curve of these things, it starts off charging at a very high rate. When it gets to, depending on every vehicle's different, a Tesla at about 60% starts to drop off. The Lightning goes a little bit longer, but when you get to 80, for sure, it's going to cut in half. And when you get to 90, it's going to cut in half again. And they really design them to encourage you, don't do that. Like, they want you to charge from 20 to 80, and then it's better for you to move on and charge later than to sit there and go from 80 to 90 and 90 to 100. I mean, you might as well just walk away.
It's like molasses. I mean, it is so slow. It's, for sure.
Peter had a question.
Yeah, is it true that charging from 110 with a level 1 is much more efficient in terms of use of electricity?
I haven't experienced that. It's super slow. So I don't think, you guys let me know what your experience is, but at 110 versus 220, I haven't experienced any better or worse necessarily in terms of efficiency.
I just think about, like, since we got our solar on our roof, like, I try to charge my car during the day, and I could charge it at 36 amps, but I set it to charge at 20 amps because we kind of did a little, ballpark math, thinking that we want to capture as much of the solar energy that we're generating. So I'm charging it a little slower just for that reason.
Hey, Chris, can you talk a little bit about the pricing of the Ford 150 and what's happened to you with pricing? Because a lot of us, like me, I'm looking for a Silverado working truck, which might be $40,000 or $50,000, but I don't know if I'll be able to get one because they're going to just want to sell the $90,000 ones because that's where they make the profit. It's really nuts. I don't want an expensive truck.
Yeah, I was really fortunate in my situation because I had bought, my Ranger from this dealer, my F-150 from the dealer, my wife's Ford Edge from the dealer. And then when this opportunity came up, I reached out to the dealer and said, "Hey, if I directed this order to you, will you honor MSRP?" Then I got in writing that they would. Now, a lot of dealers aren't doing that. And in fact, when I went to pick up my truck, they offered me $12,500 to walk away from it because they knew that they can make more than that marking it up in the marketplace. So that's a really tough thing, which differentiates, the Tesla, for example, from the Ford dealers or the Chevys, where every dealer might be different, and it might come down to your relationship. If you're a fleet customer, you might get a better deal. If you bought from them, you might get a better deal. I would recommend get it in writing before you choose what dealer. Put it in writing. And then, the pricing, when they first released, the Pro was out at $40,000, and I wanted originally the Pro. But when it came from my time to order in July, they had already sold out of all the Pros and sold out of all the XLTs. So my option was Lariat or wait. And I'm glad I didn't wait because, I was able, at the time I did it, I was able to trade in my minivan for a very high price. I was able to get a 2% interest rate, and I got the original pricing on the Lariat. Fast forward to today, that same truck is now $7,700 more, and the interest rates are much higher, and my equivalent minivan is about $7,000 less. So I literally couldn't buy the same truck today. And to someone's point earlier, even if you could find one, the best bet if you're looking for a Lightning today is trying to find a 2022, what's called a dealer demo unit. Try to find it somewhere in the Midwest where they're not as EV aligned, and it might be sitting on some dealer somewhere in some spot in the middle of Idaho or in the middle of Montana or somewhere where it just doesn't move. And you find that demo unit and you take a road trip, go out there, purchase it, drive it back, but they're going to be hard to find those work trucks because a lot of them are going to power companies, national parks, fleet customers that already have those relationships. And so if you're one of in the forum, I'm in a Facebook forum that I help run of 20,000 people. We call them unicorns. When someone finds a Pro in the public market and buys a Pro, I mean, that's a unicorn. They're so rare and they're such great values. But if you can get one now, you're still paying what was a $40,000 truck is now, mid 50s to low 60s. So they put out these prices for the Silverado and for these different trucks, and they put it out there at 40, and I'm skeptical on whether they can hit that mark. It's a really aggressive price point. And I think Tesla might be the best shot to do it because their efficiencies and their volume and their scale. But I'll be impressed if Chevy and Dodge and those people can really execute on a 40 on a truck. Anything below 50, I think would be amazing. So we'll see. It's a challenge. It's definitely tough out there. You really have to do some work to try to find an XLT or a Pro.
That's great. That's a great strategy. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. We're going to be kind of along with what you're saying. We're going to be doing our EV show over in Alameda at the by the Shoreline Car Wash, the Shore something shopping center. I can't remember what it's called exactly, but and Alameda Municipal Power is bringing their fleet Ford F-150, and it is a Pro. So, like you said, they are giving them to utilities and to other organizations like that. So come on out and check it out if you guys are around. All right. Well, I want to honor everybody's time. I'd like to thank you all for coming this evening. I want to thank the County of Marin for sponsoring this webinar. I want to thank West Marin Climate Action for helping co-present. I want to thank and for creating a big chunk of this slideshow and for supporting us. And I also want to thank Chris for bringing your expertise. So I'm going to say good night. We'll stay on for like 30 seconds. If there are no more questions that come up, we're going to go ahead and end this Zoom.